Hello, I'm Paul Laney, the retired sheriff from Cass County, North Dakota, and the current vice president of national sales for Turnkey Corrections.
And I'm Lauren Matthews, and I'm the current social media and content specialist here at Turnkey.
And you are listening to JailTalk. We are privileged today to have a very good friend here with us today and a rising star in the leadership educational community, Carrie Wooten. Carrie, welcome to JailTalk.
Hi, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Lauren, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about our distinguished guest here?
Sure. So Carrie here is a performance, mindset, and organizational culture trainer, speaker, and executive coach. She has combined her law enforcement experience and her expertise in generational communications, positive psychology, neuro-leadership, and organizational development to serve first responders nationwide. As the founder of a nonprofit, co-creator of Triad Leadership and Development, and the former dean of the National Command and Staff College, Carrie has created change agents throughout the country that increase productivity, performance, retention, and morale within their organizations. She resides in Georgia with her husband, Chris, and their 3 young children.
All right. Well, we are very, very excited to have Carrie. I've had the privilege to get to know Carrie and work with Carrie when we were both instructors at the National Staff and Command College. And I developed a really strong respect for how she delivers her message and how she related to her students and the message that she has. And this week on Jail Talk, we always talk to you. Lauren and I made a promise day one that we're going to bring you relevant information that you can go back into your jails, go into your field offices, go into your sheriff's offices, and bring back something relevant to help train your people and to help make your people stronger and make your office stronger. And we're going to deliver again today. And we're really excited about that. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about retention, recruiting, and generations in the workplace. A very relevant topic in this day and age,
so.
definitely.
Yeah.
And so before we get going, I know you. I've met you over the years and had a chance to teach and work with you. But you and I come from a little bit of the same background in our careers. So tell us a little bit about your career and your life and how you ended up where you're at now.
Sure. So my life has been an adventure, without a doubt. I was raised military. My dad's a retired admiral. And then I guess that his uniform wasn't enough. I went into law enforcement. My brothers, everyone has worn some kind of uniform in our family. So we're definitely that patriotic servant leadership. It's, you live for the benefit of others kind of family.
Put it on the line for others.
Yes. And it really is, as you know, it's incredibly fulfilling, even in tough times, but we'll get to talk about that. And then that wasn't enough, so then I also married a Marine. So I went from, military child to law enforcement myself, my own uniform, needed a little bit more, never satisfied, then became a Marine Corps wife. And
hoorah! Well, you chose well.
I chose well. No other choice.
Yes, I've never met Chris, but I already know he's like a brother.
That's right.
You also, is we always, cops sit around and tell stories. What a shock, right?
Of
We
course.
were talking one day about some of your experience in the 2 different departments you had worked at and in your almost a decade in law enforcement before you transitioned. But you had a story and one of your first calls as a young patrol officer out on the streets that most of us wouldn't respond on. Give us a little overview of that call. And I love how you kind of tell the story a little bit about how you watched it happen and your radio message.
Right, my rookie radio message that no one believed. So my agency of choice, where I began my career, was with Virginia Beach. So decent agency, size-wise, 900 officers. And if you aren't familiar with the East Coast at all, Virginia Beach is basically where everyone in the military lives. I think there's 6 bases there between Coast Guard, Marines, Navy. There's a lot going on. So with that, now rookie mistake, I'll take ownership. I was on day shift, and it was almost lunchtime. It was Easter weekend. I said, today is really slow. Now, you don't know this. I know. I did it. Rookie mistake. No one told me yet.
You jinxed it.
I know. And then I get in my car, beautiful day, and then I look up, kind of the whole, it's a bird, it's a plane. Well, it was a plane. It was an F-18 from Oceana, and I'm watching it, calling in, there is an F-18 crashing right now. It is. It's going down. I can see the smoke. They're starting to dump the jet fuel, it's raining jet fuel, something you can't even imagine until you see it. And as I call in, everyone says, repeat. Yep, there's an F-18 crashing. It's probably going to crash into the interstate. So one of my rookie calls, we expected a mass casualty. Thankfully, no casualties, including the pilots.
Excellent.
It was, definitely, grace of God there for that weekend. And made another rookie mistake. I call it in. I'm there. We're pulling people out of these burning buildings. Like, our uniforms are melting. Well, rookie mistake number 2. I got there before fire. Which means my car was there for about 11 more hours as the hoses were behind my patrol vehicle.
Well, that's how we live and learn and get to be wise, old patrol officers,
That's right. But ICS management to the max.
In your first year.
In my first year. What an exciting day.
Yes. Well, as we were relating stories, I thought you'd all get a kick out of that. Not too many of us look up and see an F-18 coming down on top of our heads.
I think it was a first for the whole agency.
And most of us don't want that to happen. So,
right.
Well, excellent.
Yeah. Well, I think it's safe to say you've already done a lot in your life and in your career. I mean, you're a wife, a mother of 3, and you're still pretty dang young.
Well, thank you.
But what made you decide to leave law enforcement and then open your own business?
So this question actually isn't asked very often. I kept it pretty close to my chest for a long time, kind of the if no one asks, I won't share it. But that's not very authentic. So here we go. So the first agency, like I said, Virginia Beach. Loved it, great experiences. But like every military spouse knows, eventually you get orders and you pick up and move to anywhere, regardless of where that is. Moved to North Carolina, switched agencies to the one that was hiring. And looking now, I knew it wasn't the right fit. It was a small agency. I was one of their first female officers ever. It just wouldn't have been a place I would choose based on my interest in law enforcement. That is when I experienced firsthand corruption and toxic leadership in my career. Now, Virginia Beach wasn't perfect, of course, right? You had grumpy guys, you had rough leadership, you also had great, officers in leadership as well. And I did 2 years at this other agency. I don't name it for obvious reasons,
for sure,
right? They're still serving, there are good guys there. It was so toxic that it became a cancer in my life, where I remember coming home and my Marine, no filter, no feelings, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not fun to be married to anymore."
Wow.
And it was, right? No filter, no feelings. Here I was, like so many cops, thinking I kept it separate, personal and professional, was failing to do so. I made that choice that day to put my family ahead of my passion and my career. Say, okay, it's obviously not where I need to be right now. And what is it doing to my marriage? I have young kids. What kind of example am I setting? So I left law enforcement, and then I sought out, how do I fix this problem? If it happened to me, I know it's happening to officers, to young, enthusiastic, passionate officers all over the country. And that was really my guiding light to opening my own business and starting to train.
Excellent. Well, and our topic is retention, recruiting, generations in the workplace. And obviously, you talked there about the two really polar opposite kind of places where you couldn't wait to go to work every day, and then you went and dreaded going to work every day. And as law enforcement leaders, having been in the role I was in for many, many years, it's our responsibility to provide that environment and that culture where you want to be the one that wants to go to work every day. And people like you can help agencies out there. And I've had a chance to watch you, teach with you at the academy. I've seen you at state shows where you get a chance you've taught in front of sheriffs, and your message is really strong. And I think as you go back into your offices and get a chance here to listen to Carrie today, and of course it's a 45 minute podcast watchcast, we can't get it all, but at the end of today, I think you'll all be able to go back and say, okay, these are some cool things that I can do, and these are some things that I can bring back. And you look at that agency where you left, and maybe if they had some of this, kind of training, if they'd had some of that exposure, your whole story might be different.
It might be.
Your whole story might be different. So that's pretty cool. So it is a very relevant topic. And, and wouldn't you agree? I mean, right now, when you look at what's happening across the country, oh my gosh. And, we had have talked about this, my peer groups. I still obviously am very connected in the law enforcement communities and around the country. And whether I'm talking to a fellow sheriff or a friend down in the South, down in Alabama, or I'm talking to somebody up here, in my old agency areas or up here in the North, it's a lot the same story and a lot the same happening. And so, what do you say about all that? With what's happening?
I would like to say we never saw it coming. Right? And this is a completely different scenario. But that's not entirely true. Right? We can go back to Ferguson. We can go back to these other riots and the other issues we've had. Now, we know that the public has shifted a little bit, and with new policies, different things that are coming out legally, some law enforcement changes, drastic changes have been made this year, right? Which just makes the job that much harder. A profession that's already uncertain and challenging and dangerous and all the things that law enforcement knows going into the job. So that's not really the problem. Where we really struggle with retention is we have a knee-jerk reaction to it. And if someone is leaving, you're not bringing them back. Very rare. I'm sure there are some outliers. But retention and recruiting, but retention is that active muscle that we need to work on every year. So maybe if we had retention programs last year, we'd be better off this year, right? We don't know because we can't go back in time. But all we can do is, we'll talk about some tools today, implement them immediately, and start prepping for how do we retain going into 21, 22? How do we, recruit, replacing the guys that we did lose this year, early retirement, the other issues. But being proactive instead of waiting is going to be key for this retention.
Last month on JailTalk, we had Sheriff Jim Stewart from Anoka County, Minnesota here, and he had a key part to play in the riots and the unrest in Minneapolis. And he's talked about, and I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but he had talked about across the entire metro area of Minneapolis, Minnesota, which you're talking, this metro area is a couple million people. They didn't have more than, 200-300 qualified applicants to even try to draw from. And so you're right when you talk about that. We've talked about for years, when I was still an active sheriff, that we saw such a change in the retention and the recruiting and the things that are happening. And we're certainly going to get to that later in the show when you talk about some of that impacting effect in the generations. But the fact that we talked about it before, is that what your message is to us in the leadership community? What
did we do?
What did we do? We knew it. You're right.
Right. We've been in retention and recruiting crisis for
and now you
a
have
decade?
a major incident, not just in the city. It went across this whole country.
Everywhere. Right.
And I look out, and from my experience, I get nervous. I get scared for our fellow law enforcement agencies out there, for our leaders out there, that if you can't go into the pool and draw from the pool because there's nobody in the pool, what do you do?
Right. Or the small pool, what kind of candidates are you getting?
Right.
Are we just selecting whoever puts in?
Right.
And that's where a lot of your issues lie, right? It's not in driving capability and handcuffing techniques. It's in character-based issues. It's in poor decision-making. It's in a lot of those personal traits. Well, maybe we didn't select the right people during our recruiting and selection process. But like you said, if your pool is only a couple people and you need to fill a spot, what do we do? Right? How do we move forward? And are we making the best decisions, saying we'll take what we can, or do we be short-staffed a little bit longer and wait for quality candidates? And how do we navigate that fine line in coverage? Because we know lack of coverage is dangerous. Right. It's dangerous for everybody, community and the officers.
Correct.
Whether you're police on the street or you're in corrections. Okay, in the jails, you need the proper ratio for inmates and deputies. It's dangerous. It's expensive. Right? And we need to overcome all of these things.
One of the things that's talked about in the country, and I'm not going to get too much into the polarizing issues, but one of the things that I first saw when I started talking, where the attack on police and the attack on law enforcement as a whole, and you're driving out a lot of the good officers because they don't feel supported, and they don't feel like they're getting the benefit of the doubt. And you look at how well-trained we are in law enforcement. This fallacy that we're not well-trained, that we don't have these de-escalation skills, that we don't have all this training is completely wrong. We do. Can we always get better? Do we always have to grow and invest? That's absolutely there. My biggest fear when I saw this happening is like the very fear these people whose narrative is the cops are bad and they're a bunch of thugs and they're doing all that, that's what they're going to get if they're not careful, because nobody else is going to want to come in, and then you start lowering the bar. And I think that's your message, is that, where do we stop that hemorrhage? And then two, where, do you settle or do you invest? And I think my hope is the hemorrhage stops, that this country smartens up and realizes the quality they have out there. Let's not defund. Let's invest more in the development and making sure they have the training and the standards and that type of stuff, because the majority that are out there are solid law enforcement officers who take hundreds of thousands of calls a day and go out and do it right. And then you have an incident like this that's literally going to change the face of law enforcement, and not for the good.
Right. I mean, it actually just came out. Police One did a study, the first study they've done during crisis, right?
Okay.
Not after the fact, with a retrospective lens, but right now, nationwide, about 55% of law enforcement think about leaving at least once a week.
Wow.
Once a week.
Wow.
So, but we know that. So now, instead of saying, okay, this sucks, we can't recruit, the pool is too small, of course they're not staying, we know all those things. We need to move to solution-oriented and try to get ahead of it, even though we're starting from behind right now.
Right.
You can't fix what's already happened this year. And none of us know what the rest of the year looks like. Right? Every time
coming years, yeah. We all have this hope that 2021 is going to be this,
right,
we
we'll
just need to
this
get there.
magical turnover.
Yeah,
Exactly. And maybe it's just me, but every time things start to settle, something else happens, right? Something else changes, something gets harder. So all we can do is, okay, we know that these are the challenges, but even on the agency side, and as a trainer and the challenges I've seen this year, it's, well, we know that we need mental health training. We know we need resilience training, but, we're just too tired. We're not going to do it right now. Well, you need it now more than ever.
Right.
And I understand, and only loosely, right? I mean, we're not on the lines anymore. I can only speak to it so much.
Right.
And I can't imagine, but, okay, if we know we need it, why are we holding ourselves back? We have these challenges, but then we're also standing in our own way from fixing our own problems.
Right. I think your point there is really, really well taken. And as our listeners and to our jail administrators and our jail leaders and our sheriffs and our field commanders out there are listening right now, is that, okay, we all know that it's happening. We're looking and we're watching it happen. We're seeing it happen. And instead of going, oh, woe is us, this sucks, is start developing an action plan now. Yeah. Stop the hemorrhage. Start saving your people. Invest in your people. And that's how I take your message is start now. Start looking at what you've got happening. How do we keep our good people? What kind of intervention? You know what? Money spent now is going to pay dividends later, because if we start going down the path is starting to go where you talk about, my God, 55% of think about leaving once a week. I didn't think about leaving ever in my career.
Until I actually did.
Until I actually did, because I couldn't believe they paid me to go out and do this. I got to go out and serve my community and be a public servant and wear that badge. And, I was respected and it was honorable. And I never would have thought that back then. And to see that percentage of people, and this was a live survey, you said now.
They just did it.
Just did it, is that's the thought process. That should scare every one of you. That should scare every one of you, that our people out there are thinking that. And, we're the leaders. You got to make the decisions then and say, okay, how do I change this? How do I stop this? And great advice. Great advice.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you took it the way I wanted it.
Yeah, well, totally. I don't think there's any way to take it but that way is if you're sitting in your chair, I don't care if you have a 3-person agency or a 350-person agency or a 3,500-person agency. It's going to impact you, and it's going to happen, and you start now, start that investment. So.
Yeah, well, we know you have hours and hours of training on these topics, and if our listeners want to bring you into their agencies, they definitely can. But what are some things that they can do right now to address the retention and recruiting issues within their organizations?
Sure. So the first thing that I really need everyone to know is that there is no Band-Aid fix. This is not something you can slap a Band-Aid on, especially this year, right? It was hard 5 years ago. It was hard 10 years ago. And this is going to be a long and painful process.
So you're not going to come in and just give us some magic
I know.
potion
I don't have
today?
magic. I know.
Come
I wish
on.
I did, right? I know. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be wonderful, but not real.
But not real. It is long and slow and painful. But what else do you have to lose? Right?
Good point.
I mean, if your people are leaving, or you don't have quality candidates coming in, if the hard road is the only road, you still have to take it. Like you said, we can't just sit back in our chairs and say, this is hard, people are leaving, we're freaking out, what do we do? It doesn't move us forward. And we always need to be moving forward in any kind of training or any kind of aspect in the profession, right? If we're stagnant, then we're falling behind. So we always have to be doing that. Now, as far as retention goes, that same survey, the officer's biggest complaint, they're telling agencies exactly what they need. And they said, we are exhausted. Our resilience is being challenged, obviously.
Right.
Our mental health is, lack of better word, garbage, which it was before. Right? Just the normal mental health status. I saw a stat the other day that in an average person's lifetime, they experience maybe 2 highly traumatic events. Law enforcement over 20 years experiences 800. Right? That sounds about right to me.
That sounds about right.
Okay, so if we already know that, again, we know, but what are we doing? Your officers are asking for mental health resources. They're asking for support. They're asking for guidance. So we need to have active retention programs simply saying, what do you need from us? We know you guys are thinking about leaving. What do you need? They're not going to ask for a new car, right? That's not going to be your norm. They're not going to ask for an extra challenge coin every other year. Okay, those small things that we do. We need to know that our leaders support us. We need to know that we can come to work and go back to this culture of accountability and camaraderie and remember our purpose of why we got into the job in the first place. So especially for the leaders who have been doing this for 20, 30 years, when was the last time you stopped and said, why did I even get into law enforcement? Because those reasons haven't changed.
Right.
People are getting into it for the same reason. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe the public's a little bit different. But again, not something that we can control. We need to focus on what we control, and that is culture of accountability and camaraderie and support and authentic leadership. And those are things that take a lot of time and effort and energy. And they are slow and they are hard. But if you don't do it, your guys are going to walk.
Right.
So that's what you have to do in retention right now. Recruiting, I know we can go into in detail, is you have a completely different kind of generation that you're recruiting.
Well, let's talk about that, because it exactly leads me to the next question I had for you. Let's talk about generations in the workplace. As a law enforcement leader, I had an organization of 200 plus. And I really noticed the difference between my Laurens, my 20-somethings, right, and then my 25, 30-year veterans, where they were at in the organization and how I had to handle a lot of them and how I had, you used to be people talk, those millennials coming into the organization. Well, by the time I left, my millennials were my lieutenants.
Exactly.
They were hardworking people. I mean, you see a lot of that. Every generation thinks the next generation behind them is a disaster.
Obviously.
Because they're just not as good as us and they don't get it, and all that. So how do the generational differences affect the workplace?
So when you have generations, is you actually have to communicate differently. Verbally, visually, digitally, all of those things. And in case anyone is thinking it, I've heard the objection of, well, why do I need to cater my communication?
Why don't they listen? It's my department. Why don't they listen?
Because it's like speaking 2 different languages. You could speak English, you could speak Italian, I could speak German, and we cannot sit here and have a conversation, no matter how hard we want the other person to get our message. You're speaking different languages. And what we forget is, in our personal lives, we cater our communication all the time. You talk to your spouse differently than you do your best friend. If you have kids, I know that I speak to my children different ways because they think differently and they receive messages differently. I'm sure you've done the same. We do it all the time just because we take the time to understand the person that we're trying to talk to and deliver that message. So when you're talking about recruiting Gen Z, you need to be extremely visible in the digital space, social media, and be strategic. If you don't have a social media coordinator or expert or liaison, you probably need to find one. Because you're not doing TV commercials and newspaper ads and flyers.
Yeah, that's not good.
Okay? Especially in COVID. If people can't leave the house, they're not seeing it.
Right? Exactly.
You can't hang it up in a Starbucks bulletin board anymore and say we have a recruiting job fair coming up. Your colleges, which I know that's a popular place, depending on if they're remote or in person, that may not be a strategy anymore. So we now more than ever focus on, what do I have on social media? I need someone to target my audience and advertise. You have to run your recruiting like a business and I mean, look at what the corporate space is doing. Mirror exactly what they're doing because you're still recruiting and hiring for a job.
And you're recruiting the same pool. You're going after the same people they want.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of young Laurens out there, and I use Lauren as an example a lot because they are the future. They're the future of law enforcement. They're the future of the corporate
20 to
world.
23 years old.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, she's here. She chose the corporate path. But there was a lot of people, I think, out there, too, that draw to law enforcement. If it's sold the right way and brought in the right way, we could probably lure a Lauren in who's like, I thought I was going to go that marketing route. Well, I get to go out and work the streets and catch bad guys, and I get to, protect my community, and I get to, take domestic abusers to jail and child molesters to jail, and I get to make my community a better safe.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go do that. But if you're not approached, and if it's just you're like, well, they'll find us. No, they're not going to find us anymore.
No,
those that 100% want to be a cop and are going to come into the business, they will find us. There's just not enough of them anymore that want to do that. And with what's happening across the country, it was interesting. Just a few weeks ago, one of your peers here, one of the guys upstairs, we were talking about, we were on a trip to Indiana and at a sheriff's office, and we were having lunch together. And young, strong, strapping young guy, athlete in college and all that. And I'd asked him, I said, did you ever think about law enforcement? He said, the way you guys are looked at right now, no way. No way. He goes, thought about it? Yeah, but no way. I wouldn't want to do that because it is so. We got to come after that somehow and go after that. And we got to go after the Laurens and we got to go after the people like that and help them understand. And then when they come in, we can't treat them, you're the newbie in this organization. Shut your mouth. Listen to what they'll leave. They'll be like, well, I'm going to go back to that corporate world because these guys are not really fun to be around.
Yeah, corporate wasn't a bad gig.
Yeah. Well, and social media really allows you to do that. I mean, especially in the media now, law enforcement is painted in such a bad light, which isn't reality. I mean, you guys put your lives on the line every day to serve communities, and utilizing social media within your organizations allows you to tell the truth of your organizations, and you directly reach people my age. Otherwise, like you said, if you put it up on a bulletin board, I never would have seen it. I looked for every single one of my jobs on LinkedIn or just social media in general.
And it's funny, and I think it's I've seen organizations and where I came from, we were very aggressive with social media because we wanted to be open, we wanted to be progressive, and the departments around, I saw that, and I saw others say, we're not going to do that Facebook thing, or we're not going to do that thing. And then, you finally think, okay, I did it. We got Facebook. Okay, what about Instagram, Snapchat, and every other brand out there that you'll kick out someday? And I'm like, what's that one? What's the one we communicate on now? Yeah, and so I think your point is go find that expert, find that person, and then turn them loose, and let them do what they know how to do to show the true agency that you are, the good agency that you are, the people that you have there, and enhance their image of what you are, and then bring them in and get them in the door.
Well, law enforcement has been silent. I understand why, right? Because they're only painted in the negative light right now. Right. But we know, and I would say most people know, that 98% of law enforcement are good people trying to do their jobs, right? Of course, there's bad apples like every industry.
But usually, don't you agree, we eat our own bad apples before anybody else does?
Oh, yeah.
Most times, the reason they know they're a bad apple
advertised.
is because they come in at the end of the year and get all of our internal affairs reports and realize, they fired those 2 people for doing this. Yeah, we did.
Right.
We did.
We found it. We fixed the problem.
Exactly.
Sure.
And I think that's something maybe that's another way that we could say we need to show that we police our own.
We need to show something, right? Because media followers, whether it be actual news channels or social media, they're going to listen to whatever is put in front of them.
Right.
So how can we expect people to want to be in law enforcement if they only see the bad or the picture? So what we need to do as recruiters is look at our agency and say, why do you want this job? Right? Paint the picture of, especially Gen Z. Gen Z thrives on, how can I have an impact? I want to be a change in my community. I want to, work for something bigger than myself. Mm-hmm. Is that not law enforcement in a nutshell?
Yeah.
Basically, sure it should be really easy to recruit Gen Z. But if we don't paint that picture, and we have to be transparent. I've had this conversation a lot recently where, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to say it sucks and the mental side is really hard and relationships are hard? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because if you lie, I know it's a strong word, but we're not preparing our officers for the inevitable mental health challenges and physical rigor and stressful relationships, all the things that we know as people who are in the industry that happen to everybody.
Right.
So we can say, hey, this isn't for everybody. We know that. But if you want to really lean in on resilience, if you really want to, when it's hard, create change in your community, if you really want to be that positive light in a year that has been full of uncertainty, turmoil, and crisis, we know it's not for everyone. But if you want to step up and accept that challenge, then you come to my agency.
That's a good point.
That's how you bring them in. But then you do it on social media with video content and microburst information, getting them to then come to your website, walk into your precinct, whatever the next step would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big thing we have to embrace too is the old dogs. The ones that have been there 15, 20, 30 years, is don't treat them like newbies. Treat them like, yes, they got to learn. They are new, and they got to learn, and they got to get their experience of that. But I think maybe in those ranks across the board, you welcome them a little stronger and make them feel appreciated, because it is going to be harder to find these people. And when they come in, show the value. I mean, we're going out, they're coming in a lot, in this day and age, a lot more educated. Sure. Usually almost everybody has a college degree behind them. Some of them are coming in
at
now
least one.
Yeah, exactly. And, we sometimes get guilty of doing that. We were joking before the show where we talked about every generation thinks the last one, it was worse than them. And we were talking about that statement by that individual who had said, the kids these days, they don't respect their parents. They have no, all they want to do is screw off, and all they want to do is, the minimum, and they don't, and they don't they're so disrespectful to their elders. And it was Plato.
Right.
It was Plato.
Still talking about teenagers.
Still talking about teenagers, and you made a good point. You said, you know what? It doesn't matter where we're going in life. 18, you're 18, and you're going to be an 18-year-old.
Right.
But as they come into the ranks in the early 20s, they've made that commitment. Yeah, they're young, and we all got to cut our teeth and prove our way. We all had to do that. But I think as the wise old veterans, we can make it a better environment for the rookies and recruit better that way as well.
When we talk about camaraderie and the blue family and everything else, so we need to treat them like family. And maybe in the academy you weed out because we know the job isn't for everybody. I get that process.
And the FTO process does that very well. And the FTO process,
of course, I wrote the letters that terminated people. It's terrible. But it was a safe and good decision for that person. Right? So those processes are already there. So if they've made it through the academy and through FTO, now they're on our payroll. Well, now they're an asset to our organization, because whether you've been on 1 month or 10 years or 20, your backup is still your backup. And we forget. Now, maybe they need help with paperwork or whatever, but at the end of the day, that only matters so much in the moment. Right? You have time to do those things.
Right.
But as far as the safety, the first responder aspect of it, everyone out there is an asset. And we need to treat them as such. If they don't feel like an asset, regardless of experience, they will find a company, an agency or a corporate company, where they feel valued and heard and like they can be an asset to the organization.
That's a great point.
So then how do law enforcement leaders utilize all this knowledge to actually enhance their agencies then?
They need to actually write down action plans. Strategic planning at its finest, but not just we've heard it, we think about it. Like you said, let's go get a Facebook page and publish it and don't have anyone manage it. We need to say, okay, who do we want here? We need to move out of that scarcity mindset into that abundance and say, we want quality candidates. What does that candidate look like? Write it on paper. Because the agency probably knows. But who do we want to hire? And then you use that as the foundation for your target audience, for your social media advertising. We want people this age with this amount of education, with these interests. I mean, you know better than I do, but how exactly you can market to that demographic. And now you are getting the applicants and you know exactly how to pull them in and how to get them to fill out that application. And now you have, even if it's a small pool, maybe it's a small, fully qualified pool.
Right.
True. That's a good point. I think the desire, where I talked about the comment one of our coworkers had made, and it's the wave that's happening across the country. But I think you're right about one thing you said earlier. We have to tell our story different. We have to show the real us and get off the defense and go on the offense about the quality who we are, because that is who we are. Our profession is about honor. It's about commitment. It's about duty. It's about service and sacrifice before self. That is who we are. It is what we do, and that is the true story. And I don't think we tell it very well. And sometimes, I think if we go in and recruit that way and help them to understand, no, it's not like that. It's not that bad. Don't read what you read on social media. Come see us. Come learn us. Come know about us. You're going to want to be part of us, because I do believe that commitment to serve community, all that is in your generation, just like it was in mine, and just like it's going to be in the next. And they want to. So I think we, and as you were all sitting there listening, start that action plan of thinking, how do I go get them? How do I go get them? And move forward.
But we need to actively go get them. They won't line up at our doors, right? People aren't putting in for law enforcement, because why would they? I mean, we can all watch the news. What part of that makes you want to go join law enforcement right now?
No doubt. No
right?
doubt.
Zero. Anyone with common sense doesn't want to. So exactly, you paint the picture, you tell the story, and you talk about all those critical values, those life lessons. I mean, all the benefits of law enforcement, not only for yourself and your family, but beyond, and having that impact. But we have to basically scream it from a mountaintop. We have to go overboard with that message for it to even be heard a little bit amongst all the other noise right now. And that's hard for servant leaders, because we don't talk about the life we saved or the good thing we did, because that's actually the job.
Yeah.
Right? You're expected to do that. That is the job, which is why it's not highlighted, why we don't talk about it. So it's not a bragging point, it's a marketing strategy.
Right.
And you just need to shift that mindset a little bit.
Well, I think one of the hardest parts for a lot of our law enforcement leaders out there right now, especially those, in the elected world, we have a lot more freedom to do what we want to do and say, and I would seize that and do everything you can with that. It's sometimes I think it's harder in the chief world, where they are controlled by and managed by councils and mayors. And then you have irresponsible leadership at that level, using it as a narrative and basically destroying their own police departments for their political message. And I think that's the other thing we have to do as law enforcement leadership, whether it's through our own agencies, but then through our associations, through our national associations, we have to go on the offensive. We have to start taking on these narratives better than we are. And that's hard when we're about, like you said, we're servant leaders, and we're service and sacrifice before self. But right now, and we're so afraid of being taken as offensive in the wrong way, that we're on the offense to hurt, and we're trying to protect our environment of being able to abuse people. No, we know that's not the truth. That is absolutely not the truth. We have to get out the narrative and the truth about who we are as law enforcement entities, and take on those leaders that are trying to destroy us. And I think it starts with exactly what you just said.
And we say the public doesn't understand, the public doesn't see us. That's actually the agency's responsibility. And that's a hard pill to swallow. It's a lot of ownership. It's a lot of work. But if your community doesn't see you for being community-oriented and being of service, then you need to work that much harder to point out the good things, even if it feels unnatural. But just blast it out with, oh, look at this kid that was found. Look at this life that was saved. Look at this great community involvement we had. And just blast, blast, blast. Because it's a numbers game. If there's more negativity punched out there than positivity, they believe the negative.
Exactly.
Because you believe what you hear more. Right. So it's just numbers. So you have to go overboard with it to make sure that message is seen.
Great advice. Well, we are coming towards the end of the show here, and like I said, we could sit here for hours, and you have hours of information. I know, because I've taught with her and been with her. But we have a small window here, and as we've talked about, if you're interested in bringing Carrie in, reach out to her. So before we get to how they can do that, what's your last piece of advice? If you have one just final piece of advice before we close out the show, what would that be?
Take time today and have everyone in your agency at all levels write down exactly why they got into the profession. Write it down. And then have those conversations and say, okay, has this even changed? And then build your recruiting and retention from there. But we don't take time to remember those critical moments that maybe were 10, 15, 20 years ago, or in times when we don't see the positive side, right? We don't see the fun in law enforcement right now, because we know it's a really fun job.
Oh, it's amazing.
It is. It is amazing.
You remember the first day you swore in?
Yeah.
Were you on top of the world? I walked out of there that day. I couldn't believe, my God, my dream is coming true. I'm a law enforcement officer, in my case for the city of Fargo, North Dakota. And I went on to do 18 years there and then 12 years as sheriff. And I never had a job. I had a passion.
Right.
I hate what I see happen to my law enforcement family now. But you're right. When you go back, when you were saying that right now, I was just remembering back to that day, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that was awesome. And we have to capture that. And if that's failing, we need to go back and get it. So
right. Capture it and then leverage it.
Great
and
advice.
then recruit from there.
Great advice.
So if agencies do want to bring you in or contact you, how can they do that?
Sure. My website is mindsetenterprise.net. Of course, my name is Carrie Wooten, and you can find me on social media at Real Carrie Wooten, Facebook and Instagram, or LinkedIn. Carrie Wooten. Website and LinkedIn are probably the best places to go.
So you kind of practice what you preach with this social media stuff.
I am there.
Well, go find her, bring her in, and reach out to her. I know she can help your organizations. And today, I hope what we brought you today in this short little blast, you can go back to your organizations and start a plan. As I said, our goal here is to just help make you better, help make you stronger. Carrie, thank you so much for coming in. It has been an absolute privilege to have you here, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. Will you come back again sometime?
As long as you invite me, I'll be here.
Well, you've got a standing invite. You've got a standing invite. We'll have you back.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm Paul Laney.
And I'm Lauren Matthews.
And this is JailTalk. We will see you next time.